I'm Gene Kuleta, editor of the Latin America Advisor at the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington. The International Monetary Fund expects the global economy to grow 6% this year as compared to last year, when the COVID-19 pandemic began pummeling economies around the world. For Latin America and the Caribbean, the IMF expects growth of 5.8% this year, just below the global average. The IMF also said the gap between rich and poor nations will get bigger amid low COVID-19 vaccination rates in developing countries and the emergence of highly contagious variants of the coronavirus. To examine the regional economic outlook, we're joined by Ernesto Revilla. He's managing director and head of Latin America economics at Citigroup, and he joins us from New York. Thanks so much for being with us today, Ernesto.
Hi, Gene. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Now, of course, as we look across Latin America and the Caribbean this year, could you tell me which countries' economies are likely to do the best and what is going to drive that economic growth?
Sure. First of all, we're seeing fantastic external conditions for the region. This comes, Gene, from very strong growth in the US, where we are forecasting growth of 6.4% this year on the back of the strength of the recovery. Growth in China, very important for South America, where we are forecasting 8.7% growth this year. Plus, you have high commodity prices, which helps the region, where most countries are producers and exporters of commodities. And more importantly, you have an environment of low rates in the US for a long time. So in a sense, the external conditions of Latin America could not be better. It's almost ideal temperature for the region. So we are having a strong recoveries in the region. We think that Chile will have one of the strongest recovery with growth of at least 9% this year. And Chile, together with Brazil and Dominican Republic, are the only countries in the region that are going to grow in 2021 more than the contraction in 2020. In the rest of the countries, we will have strong recoveries, but they are not going to be enough to cover the shortfall of what happened in 2020. Nevertheless, recoveries are strong, recoveries are ongoing because we have very good external conditions.
All right, now those were the high points of the countries that you expect to do well over the coming year. Which countries do you think will lag behind in Latin America and the Caribbean, and why?
Well, LATAM as a region is lagging behind. In your initial remarks, you mentioned how the IMF sees Latin American growth below the global average. We agree with that opinion. We have a slightly higher growth for Latin America at 6.0%, but it's below the global average and certainly not enough to cover the shortfall in 2020, as I mentioned before. Why? Because there's a lot of idiosyncratic factors in the region that are a headwind for growth in the region. And that's obviously the virus, the slow vaccination efforts, and particular political developments in some of the countries. So where uncertainty is high, which right now is mostly in the Andean economies, uncertainty about the new administration in Peru, about the presidential election in Chile and the constitutional reform process, about fiscal reform in Colombia and the presidential election coming in 2022. I think in those Andean countries, we still have a high level of uncertainty. More for the medium run, we are still worried about the institutional deterioration in Mexico. We are worried about the macroeconomic consistency of policy in Argentina in the medium run, and we're worried about fiscal risks in Brazil. But all of that will come later. So right now, the biggest uncertainties are in the Andeans.
Right. Now, when you mentioned vaccinations in the region and certainly a slow rollout in some countries, could you speak a little bit more to that with regard to how much limited access to vaccines against COVID-19 in Latin America and the Caribbean, and to what extent we're seeing hesitancy of people getting the vaccines, and how much does that all threaten the economic recovery in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Sure. Right now, the most important determinant for economic activity and recovery is vaccination efforts. And this is true around the world. Latin America is lagging the rest of the world in terms of the virus contagion. We're seeing that most of the curves of contagion in Latin America are 6 months behind what we're seeing in the US and Europe. And the same is true for vaccination. In Latin America, we have a relatively low vaccination effort. On average, I would say 20% of the population have received the vaccine. There's, of course, heterogeneity. We have countries that are doing very well, such as Chile and Uruguay, but we will definitely have a lag between when we reach the inflection point of, say, 70% of the population vaccinated in LATAM versus advanced economies. I don't think we achieved that inflection point in LATAM until the middle of 2022 at least. And in Latin America, the problem of vaccination is still very much a supply of vaccines problem. I think there are not enough vaccines for everybody who wants to get them. So as soon as countries secure some supply of vaccines, they are quickly deployed. And it's a very different environment from what we're seeing in the US, where the problem is not supply of vaccines, but demand of vaccines and vaccine hesitancy and all of those discussions. We are not there yet in Latin America. In Latin America, many countries where we have polling data, for example, a lot of the people want to have the vaccine. This is, for example, the case in Brazil, where in some poll I saw numbers higher than 90% of people were willing to get vaccinated if there were vaccines. But the problem right now is lack of vaccines. And that will be the problem, I guess, for still some time.
Right. And as we look at vaccine rollout and the slow rollout in some countries of the region, I imagine a big part of this is worry that if things don't go well on that front, economies could be shut down again, restaurants, bars, or, travel could shut down. How big of a worry is that, like those continued economic shutdowns? Do you expect to see this more now, particularly with the emergence of coronavirus variants?
Yes, it's a very interesting question, because we don't think we will see significant lockdowns again in the region. There is no appetite from the population. There is no political appetite from the governments to go back to very strict lockdown and restrictions. It's also the case that the economies are behaving much better despite low mobility, because it seems that there has been an ongoing process of adaptation where countries are able to generate economic activity, GDP, even with the lower mobility. So I don't think two things: that we're going back to the strict lockdowns of 2020 and that the lockdowns affect economic activity as much as they did in the previous year. But nevertheless, we already know, because there is enough evidence, that when the virus is out there and people are nervous about it, even if there are not official restrictions, people are more risk averse, they consume less, they go out less, and that implies a downside bias to economic forecasts. So we are watching very carefully these variants. The Delta variant is very clearly the one we're discussing right now, mostly around the world. But remember that in Latin America, there are other variants that are not as well known, that are already circulating. For example, the Lambda variant in Peru, and there's the Iota variant also in some countries. So this is well ahead of Delta in the Greek alphabet. So yeah, let's see how they work, and let's hope that they are not as bad.
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. And you mentioned commodities and appetite for commodities from Latin America, from places including China. Is it commodity producers, oil and natural gas, energy producers, minerals? Are those the industries in the region that you really expect to see doing the best this year? Or what other industries do you think are really going to have a pretty good year in Latin America?
So we see three sectors that are doing well and are expected to do well in the future. One is, as you mentioned, commodity prices are high, and this obviously benefits producers and exporters of commodities. So our commodities team in Citi forecast that energy, metallic, and agricultural commodities, all of them will have still a strong third quarter of the year before subduing a little bit in the fourth quarter of the year and into 2022. So we should expect an environment of high commodity prices for some time. So that's one sector that it's benefited. Then we're seeing that those countries that export manufacturers, for example, Mexico, have been benefiting a lot from the strong recovery in the US. So all the sectors associated to external demand are also doing well. But right now, there's a switch in the economies where services, and particularly those services that were hurt the most during the pandemic, which is entertainment, leisure activities, restaurants, and tourism, are now enjoying some of the fruits of the recovery. This obviously will be contingent on what happens with the Delta variant and mobility, but we think that there is a lot of pent-up demand, and the recovery and the reopening will start benefiting those services sectors more and more.
Definitely, definitely. Well, we're certainly all hoping for better times ahead than we've experienced in the last year and a half, both economically speaking and also certainly on the health front. Ernesto, thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you today. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Ernesto Revilla, Managing Director and Head of Latin America Economics at Citigroup, joining us from New York. Thanks again, Ernesto, for your time today.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be talking to you again soon. I'm Gene Kuleta, editor of the Latin America Advisor at the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington.